Hi, I'm Mike Ryan. In our ongoing series about the famous turquoise mines of America, we've seen many turquoise mines that are famous because they are associated with fine Native American jewelry. But you know, the Indian jewelry market really didn't develop in this country until there was a tourist market. And the tourist market really developed over the first 2 decades of the past century. Before that, all the turquoise that was mined in the US was sent to East Coast jewelers to be set in Victorian-style jewelry that was a cluster setting with turquoise, pearls, diamonds, other precious gems, and going to an East Coast market, Midwest market, and overseas. The early mines that were famous for producing the turquoise for that jewelry was first in New Mexico. So today we're going to look at some of the famous turquoise mines in New Mexico, primarily 2 out of Cerrillos and in the Bureau Mountains that became known as Tyrone. The Tyrone turquoise was named in the 70s when James Hamilton obtained a concession from Phelps Dodge to work the dumps. And really between that time and the early period of the story, which we tell in Turquoise in America Part 1, Great American Turquoise Rush, 1890 to 1910, there was really no turquoise produced. So after the period 1910, 1915, very little turquoise came out of New Mexico. And in fact, the area around Cerrillos, which was mined by the American Turquoise Company, was not existent at all after they went bankrupt in 1915. Now, there has been some turquoise that came out of that, and it's very famous because we know it as it coming from the Tiffany mine, even though the named location is the Muniz. And that claim is now owned by Douglas Magnus. So we're going to take a look at some New Mexico turquoise. In this tray, we see a range of turquoise, and the turquoise on the left side of the tray here is all from Cerrillos, and on the right side is from Hachita, which is in the southernmost part of Grant County in the Little Hatchet Mountains. We see up here at the top the type of turquoise that would have been sought after during the period of the Great American Turquoise Rush, 1890 to 1910. And that story is told in Turquoise in America, Part 1. We see this example is probably the best example of the type of clear sky blue. And you can see the difficulty that the miners had, because in this particular instance, they would not have been able to cut this stone with this beautiful little matrix inclusion. They would have had to cut that just for the area of the sky blue, and maybe this little bit, this part down here. We see a little deeper blue here, and again, this would have been cut more to exclude any matrix, as would this one. So you can see the challenge that they had in that, because of all the matrix inclusion, when they did find the color they wanted, it had to be cut with so much wastage that it was a very expensive proposition. And that was one of the reasons why the prices of turquoise at that time were much higher on a present value basis than we find today. Here we see more of a combination, sort of a blue-green, which you see a lot in Cerrillos. But Cerrillos is probably more known for this sort of look, this sort of green look in the brown matrix associated with the rhyolite formation. Here we see a really beautiful, dark, saturated green. In this instance, we have a a beautiful green. It's very similar, a little deeper than this one. This one is very beautiful stone because we have some blue here formation, a little bit of green there. So here we have an example of turquoise from the Cerrillos mine area, which is just south of Santa Fe. When we come over on this side, we see an example of what is called boulder cut. And this is all from Hachita mine, which is owned by Philip Chambless. Now, Hachita really never produced much turquoise over the years and certainly would not be included as a famous mine. But once again, who can account for fashion? My dear wife, Pam, thinks that this boulder cut and this Hachita turquoise is one of her favorite looks. And you can see why, because of the beautiful stone with just these hints of color occurring in the ribbon cut. So here we have a look at turquoise from Cerrillos and Hachita. Now we get to see some turquoise from Tyrone. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Tyrone turquoise is a marketing name that was developed in the 1970s by James Hamilton, who obtained the concession rights from Phelps Dodge, who owned the copper mine that was located outside the ghost town of Tyrone, New Mexico. That town had been developed in 1915, and it was a mining town of the Phelps Dodge Corporation that was used for the home for their miners there. And this was at a time when there was a lot of interest by these large companies, large mining companies especially, in curtailing the influence of the unions. And in Phelps Dodge, they developed this very parochial, patriarchal type of attitude where they would basically take care of the families. So we'll give you a place to stay, you shop in our company stores, we'll have medical facilities for you, we'll have entertainment. And this was something that was done by different companies at that time. One of the most famous was the Pullman Corporation that developed the famous Pullman sleeping car, and that was outside of Chicago, Pullman, Illinois. But here we see an example of the turquoise that would have been obtained during the 70s and then possibly later, because there was a lot of high grading that took place on those dumps over the years. We see an example here up at the top of something that I don't know that it's often associated with Tyrone turquoise, which again, during the earlier period of the Great American Turquoise Rush that we cover in part 1, would have been known as Silver City turquoise, turquoise coming from the Bureau Mountains. The largest company that was mining there was the Azure Turquoise Mining Company, but never really known as Tyrone, because when the town of Tyrone was developed, the turquoise phase was pretty much over by that time. But we see here this beautiful turquoise, and maybe you can see in that some pyrite inclusions in there. That certainly is not something that is normally associated with New Mexico turquoise. Very beautiful, rich look. I think someone might confuse that a little bit, perhaps with another Phelps Dodge copper mining area at Morenci. But that's not surprising because, hey, the turquoise doesn't care where it comes from. And when you're developed over millions and millions of years, the geography of the modern times really doesn't play much into it, except for us. Now, when you come down here, we see some turquoise that, again, to my eye, I could look at that, and if somebody told me, wow, that's Bisbee turquoise, you could fool me. because it certainly has a different sort of matrix formation to it. And the color blue is a bit different. So another example of how difficult turquoise identification can be when we see turquoise from Tyrone, but coming in two very different looks. Down here in the bottom, we're seeing this wonderful bead necklace, which includes Tyrone turquoise, red and pink coral, and sugilite. And this was made by Bruce Eckhart, very famous Anglo bead maker. And I believe this was made in the 80s. Bruce says that he received a call from Pat Gushurst, who was most probably not getting his Tyrone turquoise through a normal concession. And he called Bruce and said, come over here, I got this great turquoise. So Bruce did. He got this turquoise. He made this necklace, sold it, and then many years later, it came back to him because the woman who had worn it for many, many years had reached an age where she needed to sell some of her jewelry. So Bruce got it back, and then he sold it to me. And of course, the beadwork is just absolutely exquisite on this piece. And it's some awful nice turquoise too. So here we see an example of New Mexico turquoise from Cerrillos, Hachita, and Tyrone.